All right, there we go. All right, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the first ROG meetup of 2025. Today, we're going to be talking about a robot's hierarchy of needs as you're building your first, second, 10th robot. What do you need to consider? What do you need to get in place in terms of layers to make sure your customers get a great robot and you create a robot that can be sustainably deployed and sustainably serviced once it's in your customer's hands? Before we start, go around the room. I'll start and call out the next person, who calls out the next person, who calls out the next person, etc. And we'll jump into the list of topics from there. So Joe Wiecek, co-founder Robot Operations Group and current director of technical operations at Outrider, working in distribution yard automation to pull trailers around distribution yards all day, every day. And then prior to this, I was at Brain Corp, leading the growth of the fleet there. I'm going to call on Steven.
Hi, everyone. Steven Hypnarowski. I'm a systems engineer at a company called Agtonomy. Simple enough, we're doing agricultural automation, and our goal is to have autonomous tractors running through farms and helping people every day. Prior to this, I also worked at Brain Corporation as a systems engineer. Next, Florian.
I'm Joe's partner in crime here at ROG. And I'm also the founder and CEO of a company called InOrbit. We do robot operations software. So I like to say we don't make the robots, but we make the robots work better. And yeah, I think we find this interesting challenge of how do you scale your fleet of robots, both from the point of view of the OEMs, the companies making robots, as well as from the point of view of the end users, the companies that are integrating the robots into their operation. So we help them work better together, I guess. And I'll pass it on to Michael.
Hi guys, Michael Bocut. I'm coming in from Camline, formerly Romeric Corporation. We've known Florian for years now. It feels shorter than it has been, I think, and I think that's a good thing. That's how we were introduced to ROG. We come from the semiconductor industry, and material control systems is the name of our game. It's a software that orchestrates multiple different kinds of fleets of transportation and storage devices. So robot arms, stalkers, overhead transport, conveyors, AMRs, AGVs, and excited to be here to learn from everybody. And I will ping. Have we heard from Rick? I don't think so.
Hi, my name is Rick Hernandez, and I'm a robotics engineer, and I'm interested in learning more about this group. And I guess I'm seriously considering starting my own robotics startup, and kind of wanted to learn as much as I can before I do something like that. So I'm excited to learn from everyone and to share as well.
And Rick, are you currently in industry at an existing robotics company?
Well, I do a lot of consulting at the moment for more primarily mechanical and electrical engineering. But it's not specifically robotics. I just that's where my degree is, and that's where I'm really passionate about. But I'm not currently employed through a robotics company at the moment. I think that's why I'm wanting to kind of either start my own or to get involved in, because that's really where I spend all my time and energy kind of researching, and really something I really love doing.
Well, even better. As an aside, I'll say two things. One, this subject matter today, if you do start your own company, I think will be incredibly valuable in terms of painting a roadmap of what you'll need to do to not fall out of the gate when you first get on customer hands. And if you are looking at applying for jobs, I've seen this year there have been a significant number of new openings in the industry that we didn't see over the course of 2024. So hopefully that trend continues. And there are significantly more opportunity in the robotics industry going forward through 2025.
Thank you.
All right, let's jump in.
I'm sorry, Joe.
Right.
Are you saying we can't just sprinkle AI dust all over the robots and they just work?
You can apply. AI can fix broken hardware, right? Yeah, so that's actually where it's a great transition. AI is going to be incredibly powerful, but to get it to work, you need to have a system that already works. I've used the phrase personally, AI can make a functional system incredibly valuable, but it can't make a system go from nothing to something. I might get proven wrong in the next 10 years, but that's where we're at today. 5 years, Florian, I see you kind of maybe not.
I think all I'm seeing is just very different approaches to physical AI, embodied AI, where it feels a little bit like there was before people started doing reinforcement learning at scale, you would have to do a lot of things by hand. It kind of feels like that level of jump forward, but I honestly can't really put my finger on it on exactly how to bootstrap that.
Right.
But I mean, to me, it feels like I mean, you've seen those videos of a quadruped with absolutely no control and just a rewards function, and it figures out how to stand up and figures out a gait and everything. And it felt like unnatural at the moment when that came out, but it made perfect sense once you saw it working. So I think I'm expecting that level of transition where it's like, oh, why would you waste time doing this when you could just train it in sim? But I don't know exactly what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and I actually agree with you, Florian. And now I will actually segue into this, because if you look at what I'm not gonna put my finger on the scale of the conversation yet, even though everyone in this room knows I have strong opinions and can go on at length. If you look at what it takes to create a system that you can apply that AI on top of, and Florian, you're right, there's been incredible advancements, and we're going to continue to see incredible advancements. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is about humans and how they can achieve the best. I am not a psychologist, and I forget what the top tier is, but how a human becomes thriving in their environment. And it's what you need to set up to make sure that a human has all the needs satisfied so that they can thrive. And it starts with shelter and food and clothing and safety. And there's a number of different buildups to where if all of that's satisfied, a human can really, run not 1,000 miles an hour, but thrive in their own lives. Robots stem from a conversation I had probably about 2 months ago, where robots are kind of the same way. Someone asked me, if you had to have a hierarchy of needs for robotics to make them successful, what would it be? And I'm like, well, I have my own ideas, but that would also be a great rogue topic. And so if you look at what builds into a robotic system, you've got hardware, software, test, you've got supply chain. It's a physical product that is both hardware, software, systems connected, to Stephen's point a few minutes before we started the recording, gets software updates. There's so much that goes into this system that if you try to do all at once and you prioritize everything at the same time, or if you don't prioritize the things that are lower on that pyramid, you're potentially going to have some significant problems. So with that, I've got some ideas. I want to hear from the room, but I'd posit that until you can even start to talk about the software that runs on the robot, before you can talk about the application of the robot, my opinion is you need a system that you turn the key on and it comes up and powers on every single time without failing, without components failing to power up, without networking issues. And I'd argue that hardware and stable hardware comes way before anything else in this industry. Stephen, I'm going to ping you for an opinion on this, because you've seen some stuff as well in your history.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hardware is crucial for everything. I think for some time, I would say that the hardest part of robotics is everything. That what is challenging with building a successful robot is having everything in this hierarchy working to some function or another. Now, I think then the challenge becomes, how do you force rank things? Certainly stability of hardware is crucial, ensuring that you have reasonable hardware stability in the system coming up. as well as having consistent hardware across your development fleet. I can't tell you how many times there's been frustrations that one robot is working a little bit better than the others, and you can't quite tell why. So certainly hardware is crucial, and amongst that is understanding the limitations of hardware as it's given. So what I mean by this is things like the controls tuning and the sensor calibrations. So every robot that gets manufactured has a slightly different performance. Let's say to achieve a turn of a certain rate, you need to actuate the steering system to some level. Well, from robot to robot, that may not be fully consistent just due to tolerances in the electromechanical system. And of course, with sensors, there's the tolerances internal to the sensor itself, or intrinsic tolerances, and the tolerances of how that sensor is placed on the machine, or the extrinsic tolerances. So I think in addition to just having the hardware consistent, it's important to understand that there are limitations to how consistent the hardware can be from robot to robot.
Yep. And Rick, in your experience, especially coming from electrical mechanical, in this industry or in other industries you've applied it to, do you see the same thing? Do you see other industries treating hardware the same way as robotics? Do you think we have a bit of a way to go?
I think some of my clients do have that mentality. Some of them actually are looking at it as unique opportunities to improve the processes. But I think it really does depend on the actual mindset of the team and kind of how they're approaching to produce a solution, to meet their objective.
Cool. And then I want to double down on something you said, Stephen, which is you mentioned, why is one robot working better than another robot? I think that's a question that we all deal with all the time, whether it's in the lab, in production. I remember one customer who was, and Stephen, I'll remind you that this is open and not everyone here is under the same NDA you and I were under. There's one customer who was very concerned that a particular robot wasn't following a path the same way every single time. And that's where you have to draw a mentality between an AGV and an AMR, because the autonomy stack of an AMR allows you to take different paths, whereas an AGV would follow the same path every single time. On a hardware level, Stephen, and Rick as well, if you've got experience here, and even Florian or Rick, yes, you joined, welcome. When you're trying to diagnose differences in performance, in your experience, do you find it to be hardware or specific calibration or something upstream, or do you find those variations, have they more frequently been environmental or software related?
Well, gosh, Joe, I think that's the challenging question. Often when you have one robot performing better than the other, it's difficult to ascertain what's occurring from one system to another. That's where it's important that as we bring these robots up, we build diagnostics and metrics to try to be as consistent as possible. From a hardware perspective, if we have ways of understanding calibration, providing raw results, we can then say, okay, well, both of these vehicles had very similar calibration factors. But then we look at whether or not they're running the exact same version of software, or if there are any changes to the mechanical system that we weren't accounting for. Is there unaccounted for weight or appendages on this system? And therefore, everything that's going into this becomes difficult to understand exactly what is unique between these. I think that's where our challenge is often with scaling robots. And that's why I'd argue that similar to in manufacturing, you want to have as close to the root cause diagnostics as possible. So as soon as you manufacture the system, have diagnostics that let you know that all the hardware has come together appropriately. And all the way up to the software deployment, how do you ensure that the software has deployed correctly to the vehicle?
Warren.
Yeah, I think we made this kind of very natural transition from talking about the hardware boots up to performance and scaling and comparison between units. And I think there's as Stephen was saying, there's a continuum there where you very quick, like you can't have hardware without the software that does something with it. But I think, yeah, what I would say is I came, maybe is the right tense, to robotics from a very different space, from very high scale cloud applications. And honestly, I was really shocked at how few of those practices were actually transferred to robotics, and that's part of the origin of this group. But there's this kind of like fundamental thing called observability, and like you wouldn't think of starting up a server in the cloud and say, well, let's hope it works. We'll see when we press the buttons, right? But I don't think that's been as equally widespread in robotics. So I would agree with what Stephen was saying, which is this need for, I would elevate diagnostics to, continuous observability. And I'd like to talk about the artisanal phase of robotics, where every server is a little different. You run some scripts and you hope that they behave the same or
Your pets
similarly.
instead of your cattle.
Yes. So I'll let you go with that analogy, because I don't like the part where you take the server behind the barn.
Yeah, I'm the one who runs with that. Florian doesn't like running with taking the server behind the woodshed. It's also why I hate googly eyes on robots, to be clear, because I don't like anthropomorphizing the robots, but that's a different conversation. Florian, that's a great. You touched on something I was actually about to touch on as well, which is Stephen's message about diagnostics and monitoring. I think is its own level of the pyramid. So I think that repeatable, consistent hardware that Stephen mentioned is the base of the pyramid. Is your hardware consistent? Does it power on? Is it something that you know exactly what's out there? And then I think, and I don't know if it's the next level of the pyramid or the next level up the pyramid, is that level of diagnostics and understanding and monitoring and having eyes on what your system is doing. And we haven't even talked about software yet, but I think that metrics and diagnostics affect both hardware and software. And if you separate those out into two different things, you could be in a world of pain. I haven't pinged Michael yet as well, which is Michael in Romeric and now Camline's business. Variability between installations, is that something that you find challenging? The hardware you use is out of the box and already pretty high quality. Am I making that assumption correctly?
I would say to both of those questions, yes. I mean, we've had our software, we've deployed it in many different factories around the world. We're very standardized. The semiconductor industry as a whole is also very standardized. If you look at SEMI, the United States-based organization that helps with the standardization of procedures and communication between tools and systems, it's very standardized. And yet, every single hardware company that we go to that says that they follow those standards has their own flavor and has their own interpretation of those standards. And it's kind of like moving out of a house. When you feel like you're done 90% of the way, you realize that you're only 10% of the way, because all of the little things inside of the house take up 90% of the time instead of that first 10% of the time that you use. We're talking about fluent communication between systems that don't involve a human with a human brain. And so you have to understand all of the abnormal scenarios and all of the weird states and stages of robotic operation that you've got to be in control of. And that's where you have to get pretty deep into the weeds and have to have a really good understanding of how everything's going to operate if you want to achieve that level of 24/7 optimization.
Yeah. I think you guys all touched on something. And Florian, thanks for bringing up the actual hierarchy of needs. I said thrive, but it's self-actualization. So someone is going to come back to me 5 years from now and say I got it wrong. There's something I want to touch on, and I almost put it in diagnostics and monitoring. I don't know if it would be under safety and security or love and belonging here, but we also haven't talked about QA or test or the processes to ensure that what you release to the field with hardware and software is high quality, is ready to go. And I see it a lot, a lot of robotic startups, we've signed this customer contract. We don't have more than one prototype. How do we build 5 of them, go, 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 and then you're trying to get 5 prototypes on a truck to get to your customer by tomorrow. And so that portends some future pain in terms of you've already set your culture up that you don't necessarily test. So how do you hit pause and add formal QA and then come back in? It doesn't have to be that formal, but at least some sort of repetitive test. So, and I'll toss this up to the group here. In terms of QAing, do you see that the people you work with have full high quality test sets? Do you see that it's a lot of, call it rapid prototyping, potentially even in production? Or do you see it somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. I think it varies. What I enjoy is when teams who are delivering features, let's say your navigation team, your perception team, your safety team, as those teams deliver towards the vehicle, they understand that it needs to scale, that it needs to be consistent, and they're responsible for their own testing to quite some level. I think that, of course, there's the challenge of everything coming together and needing everything to operate ideally, but when teams take on their own responsibility with high quality, repeatable deliverables, I think that ends up being much more successful. And ultimately, when it comes to quality assurance, I don't think that software teams ignore it. I don't think that they believe it's not important. I think that it gets prioritized lower than what's necessary to build a demo. And so I think often it's a question of, at what point is it priority? And at what point does your MVP really become held back by the detailed autonomy?
Yeah, but I would also counter that, Stephen, where the detailed autonomy, if you don't know what you're throwing out to the field, that's a bigger problem for your customers than hitting a deliverable on time. But your prioritization of resources, I think, is a critical comment in terms of we're a lot of startups. We don't have revenue. You have to make customer deliverables or you're not going to get that next paycheck. And then you're going to show up and there's going to be a padlock on the door. And that's also that changes the mentality to the point of your psychological needs going on the actual Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The psychological needs of keeping the paychecks coming in and keeping the lights on does overwhelm potentially the do the right thing mentality. Michael.
We've mentioned one of the big buzzwords of today, which is AI. I want to bring up the second, which I think applies, and that's DT, digital twins. I agree with everything that's been said. Hardware generally tends to take the limelight. You can see it, it's flashy, it moves, it's easier to demo, and software kind of takes they're the guy in the background or the puppeteer that's making everything move correctly, and they're not the ones who are being observed or being applauded a lot of times. One of the big solutions that we've found super valuable at our company is having a digital twin that operates the same exact way as the hardware, so that you can take your software, test it against this digital twin, and in theory, if that digital twin is good, it operates the same way as the hardware. It allows you to test, it allows you to iterate, it allows you to debug without influencing or impacting the work that the hardware guys are doing, because they don't want to give up their time. That's precious. They need to make sure everything's working on their side. But the software guy, and this is actually going back to that question about our projects and the maturity of our products, we usually hit obstacles in our projects when customers don't give us access to hardware. It's being used in production, or it's being developed, or it hasn't shipped yet, and those cause delays because we're not able to confirm 100% how we get everything done on our side. So we built a digital twin, and that digital twin has enabled us to do a lot better on projects because we're able to test, we're able to debug, we're able to make sure everything's working the way that we expect it to, based on specifications and other things. And I think that's beyond valuable when you're working on software, specifically in the robotic space.
Cool. Go ahead, Florian.
So just to make sure we cover the full pyramid, I wanted to go, we talked about physiological needs, that I think is the hardware. We talked about a little bit about safety and so on. I think the equivalent of so love and belonging, I think, is about how you relate to your peers, not just internally. So I think to me, it's how well a robot gets along with other robots, not just other robots from the same vendor, but other robots that they've never previously encountered, they've never heard of. There's, I would say, some tentative progress on that front, but I think there's a underappreciation for with most robotics companies, you're so focused on your own robot, it's your baby. Why would you care about any other robots? And or perhaps why would anyone ever want to buy a robot that's not yours? But the reality is any reasonably complex operation is going to need different robots for different tasks with different capabilities. And I think there's some initial efforts in that direction, but more needs to be done.
Yep. All right, so I think we've gone from hardware through the systems coming up and observability and making sure those systems are up. And now we're bridging into software in terms of, I briefly mentioned QA. Michael talked about digital twin to make sure you can iterate on hardware. Now, Florian, you're talking about the ecosystem. So I want to hit pause because I know we've got two folks who joined since we did introductions. I want to give them an opportunity to give introductions first. Ricky, you want to start? Tell us
Hi,
who you are.
everyone.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So for those who don't know me yet, my name is Ricardo. Everyone calls me Ricky. I'm from Argentina. We work in staffing for robotic development and robotic operations, and I'm here to learn mostly.
All right. And last but certainly not least, Zula.
Hey everyone, Shola here. I'm in Houston, currently kind of working at Cruise as a general manager, waiting for the hammer to drop from General Motors. And before that, it was at Neuro and at Uber. So mostly been focused on the AV space, but switching / changing aperture to think about robotics more broadly. Backgrounds in chemical engineering, used to work in manufacturing. So really excited about what's happening in logistics and in retail and everywhere but AV. So really excited to be here.
Welcome, welcome. All right, we'll jump back into it because now it's everyone's favorite subject, software, because software, already ate the world. So if you're talking about the build up here and that pyramid that we're trying to build, I don't believe that autonomy is the first level of software in the pyramid. And I say that, and that might be yeah, I don't think anyone on this call necessarily will take offense to that, but I know plenty of people in the industry who might take offense to that. And the reason I say that, and then I'll toss it up for either concurrence or someone to refute me, is autonomy software is great once you understand what that autonomy software is doing, and that autonomy software can provide value. And here's where Florian's previous comment comes in, is how you designed your system. If the autonomy is meant to be used with remote intervention, for example, or you deploy it and you don't know what that autonomy is doing, or your customers don't have a way to view the performance of your system and make sure they're getting their money's worth, I'd argue the autonomy is second to the ability to provide your customers value. And you can build the best robot in the world, but if your customers don't see that it provides value, you're not going to sell it. So I'd almost argue that in the pyramid, the supporting software and here Stephen also mentioned earlier, software updates to monitor, update, interact with, and get insights from your autonomy software is more important than the autonomy software itself.
Yeah, I'd like to expand on that and say that before we really even get into software, I think there's a crucial piece, which is the user interface, how somebody interacts with this vehicle, both as somebody managing a fleet of vehicles or somebody just even initiating a mission with one of these vehicles, a path. I think that's such a crucial part that prior to understanding or detailing how the autonomy needs to occur, if you don't really understand how your customers are trying to utilize this, it becomes difficult. One of the sayings I like is robots don't work, appliances do, which I think is our challenge as we build these robotic vehicles to serve certain needs. How do we treat them more like tools and appliances that are as technical as they need to be, yet as simple as possible so that they can be easily interfaced with by the users?
So I was just writing down that quote, Stephen. And I'll be honest, when I came in this morning, I had a brief kind of my own internal vision of this pyramid. And I actually put user experience above autonomy, assuming that once you had the robot working, then you could add the user experience in. But you bring up a good point, and it's something that I've always talked about, which is if you don't have something your users want to use, you're going to be dead in the water. So to that point, Stephen, I think a good user experience can make up for a gap in autonomy. And until you can deploy a robot that doesn't have a gap in autonomy, which even with AI, I don't think is in the short term, I think you got a great point where that user experience has to come in before the autonomy. I didn't actually put autonomy on the top of the pyramid, but now I'm kind of being convinced that maybe autonomy is the top of this pyramid. I don't know.
Yeah, perhaps, right? I think when we look at everything that's involved, one of the important things with user experience to understand is the difference between your everyday use and your initial setup. And I think a lot of effort into building a strong autonomy stack can be eliminated through a more laborious setup process, or vice versa. And I think the question is understanding how your customers are or are not willing to have a more involved setup process.
Yeah, and I've found that to be very, and since I created the agenda, I'm going to go off topic briefly on site setup, Stephen, and initial setup, because I think that it's very industry specific. I think that you and I came from commercial retail, onesie twosies. You need to have a very different setup experience from going into a warehouse or going into somewhere where it's a mission critical system, because the price point and the amount of money you can spend on that setup is drastically different. Setup can be white glove for a much longer time in logistics, or where customers buying 20 robots for an individual site, or the site setup includes infrastructure as well, and that's included in the price point, versus they're buying a floor care robot or they're buying a restaurant delivery robot and there's one or two in a facility and you don't have the ability to do that. But the flip side of that is environments also change. So your initial setup, you're probably going to have to run more than once over the lifespan of the robot. But it's definitely a trade-off I see a lot of companies doing in terms of, do we spend more effort up front to make sure the environment can handle robotics, or do we spend more time on the autonomy to make sure that the autonomy can be more capable in a changing environment, or a dynamic environment, if you will. Ricky, you see robots on the ground in your line of work. So in your experience, would you rather have a rougher user experience, or would you rather see for a trade-off with better autonomy, or would you rather see, and this might be a bit of a layup given your line of work, would you rather see autonomy that is not quite as mature with a lot of human intervention or polishing outside of the autonomous software stack?
I think I want everything, but as you mentioned, I think the user experience, especially at this stage of the development of the industry, is quite important, because you won't scale robotics if you don't scale first the brains of the people that decide to use those robots. So user experience is pretty much as being accepted. autonomy will rise because anything we don't want to work. So anything that is autonomous will be will grow by itself. Like it will happen. People is roboticists are working on that. So in terms of the market, I think user experience now at this stage is quite important.
Agreed. And Chola, you've had a lot of calls lately in the industry as well. Do you have the same take?
Yeah, so I was actually going to say so 2 points on this. One is a lot of just leaning into like the autonomy a bit here, like a lot of autonomous vehicle companies assumed, and I think many have learned that this was the wrong assumption, is that if a vehicle didn't know what to do on the road, then stopping would be the best solution, right? Which
we learned differently.
It's not a good idea. And so as they started revising and thinking about the right experience for all of the stakeholders, including people in the vehicle, a lot of what came into place is truly user experience, right? So an XMI on the top of the vehicle so that pedestrians and other drivers could actually see, oh, this vehicle is stopping for a reason, whether that be because someone's crossing the street, but also HMI in the back seat so that the rider could see the lights turning red. We hear, even if you cannot actually perceive it, we hear or have like third-party API that's pulling in that an ambulance is nearby. And so we are stopping, right? Which is, to your point, right? It's like, here is the trade-off, right? Until autonomy is perfect, and then everyone can trust that autonomy, there needs to be some mediation, and that's where user interface can play a really important role. And that's actually what we found, right? Is like all of the studies with the XMI and the HMI just showed that perceived safety went up, even though the driving behaviors are exactly the same, right? It's like, yeah, the vehicle is still going to stop and it should actually be able to handle the situation. But now that people know why the car is stopping, they all of a sudden feel like, okay, we can trust this car more than we could, 30 seconds before we had this insight.
Lauren.
So on the topic of user interface, I wanted to kind of piggyback. I think there's lots of stakeholders, as Sola was saying, and I think we tend to, this is true for indoor robots at least. Everyone like slaps one of those tablets on it with like some buttons, and I'm like, it kind of boggles the mind. It's moving. So what are you going to do? Are you going to chase after the robot, trying to press that button on the screen? So I think there's a lot of people forget about the need to remotely communicate with the robot, right? I mean, we're doing it right now. We use Slack all the time. So I think there should be, ways to remotely understand what the state of the robot is, maybe even see the world through the eyes of the robot, through the sensors, give a remote human situational awareness, and really just leverage the fact that humans are, as of this moment, better improvisers and problem solvers than any autonomy stack. And I think we see this all the time with robots, and this is where some of these foundation models may be changing the game a little bit, in that in the old world, you just trained on the data that you had, not on the data that you didn't have. And even with simulation, right, you could do training in sim, but to some extent it was up to the imagination of whoever was creating the sim. And like let's say in a grocery store department, somebody's breaks a bottle of ketchup. I mean, what are the chances that you simulated that? And now the robot has to decide, ketchup or lava, right? And should I keep going or should I stop? So I think that having a UI for interventions and a mechanism that supports that is critical, and in my opinion will continue to be critical for quite some time.
Yeah, and I think that that's not just remote as well. It's also the local users, Florian. I was in the United Club in Denver on Friday, flying home from a meeting, and they have the Bear robot going around. I think every United Club has them. Some use them as push carts. The one in Denver actually uses them still as robots. Probably an interesting case study to go into there that I'd love to hear more of. It's probably buried deep inside Bear robotics. But my colleagues and I were at a tall table, and there was someone at the short a seat, and my colleague had his suitcase behind him, and the guy in the seat had his suitcase slightly sticking into the aisle. And well, first I tried to mess with the robot right away because that's what I do in this industry because I know some shortcomings. It was really good actually. But the robot got stuck and it kept beeping and spinning and beeping and spinning, but there's nothing on the UI that said that it was stuck. And finally, an attendant came up and just kind of jostled the physical robot, which I guess tries to, I don't know what it does under the hood, but maybe it resets a state, tries to remap, replan when there's an intervention like that. But essentially, there is no indication why the robot stopped. And this is something I've seen more times than I can count with the robots I've worked on, as well as other robots, is telling the users on the ground or telling someone who can't interpret a cost map why a robot is stuck is a really hard thing to do. And if we can get better at that, one, that interpretation of why it's stuck on the ground level could potentially feed back automatically into resolution techniques, but also just give the person on the ground a little bit more idea of, oh, I just need to move this potted plant instead of, jostle the thing and push it through and hope that it starts working again. Florian?
So we actually have a Bear robot, and we hosted a large investor event last Friday. And I mean, the first thing I would say is a robot like Bear or Relay. They're very good at navigating in these crowded environments, and I think most of the time they get the right balance between being pushy and trying to get to their goal without being too annoying for people. And the Bear robot will say, "Hey, I'm stuck. Push me away." And it is designed so that you can just grab it and push it. Yeah. So that's good UI, where it's like you can take it, or UX in general. But it's still really hard to know what this thing is doing. Like, I was watching people who had never seen a robot, and they're like, the robot was supposed to go to, it had a waypoint that it was trying to get to, and people were standing there in a circle drinking wine. And the robot is like, can I get through? And people were like, turning around and saying, what is this thing doing? Right. So I think, there's lots of stakeholders. There's the casual, observer. There's the, the external UI on the cars, I think is a great example of that. And it's really hard to convey intent to people.
And it's intent and behavior. I'm drawn to a story I heard years ago of a friend who had an Australian Shepherd, and they had a party at their house, and they realized about an hour in that everyone had congregated in the same room because a shepherd had literally herded them into the same room. And I see the same thing with this robot in the United Clubs: is people will get out of the way, or they'll move with a proper amount of aggressive, like the right balance of aggressive behavior versus not. But it's interesting, and that's why I think, going to get back to the pyramid, autonomy is the top of the pyramid because your user experience allows the autonomy to be successful. And I thought it was going to be the other way around coming in this morning. I thought that that we were going to say autonomy is important and then user experience is the cherry on top, but I think I'm convinced otherwise. All right, we've got about 3 minutes before we jump into our updates. Any last thoughts? Tola, you came off mute.
Yeah, I did. I was just going to say, I think that is generally where I am, particularly for, to Florian's point, this idea of like, you know, are we expecting people to chase these robots? A lot of my experience is a lot of time is spent on trying to get the autonomy to work, and then user interface taking a back seat. And then in places where you have an operator or a picker or an associate who's actually interacting with the robot, they have the worst experience. And they also represent, you know, if the chief innovation officer is on the bleeding edge of the adoption curve, the associate is anywhere on that curve, usually not on the bleeding edge, right? And so they get the worst experience and they are the most severe graders of the experience. And so I've seen a lot of situations where in B2B robotics, you ultimately have some sort of like, there's the theoretical max for the metric, and you're way below it. And a lot of it, that gap is the operator experience. And so how do you think about closing that gap? So just wanted to add that because it's definitely something that I've seen over and over again.
Love it. All right, any last thoughts? All right, we'll take the last 5 minutes. If any, the typical, is anyone hiring, looking for a job, etc. announcements, speak now.
Yeah, I'll say Agtonomy is hiring. We have a number of positions on our website. That's Agtonomy. Hop on. We're scaling fast, and it's a really exciting time.
Anybody else?
Awesome. I will say I actually just got the email that my position is officially impacted while we're on this call. So I am, yeah, it's fine. We knew it was coming. So officially on the market and looking for new roles, trying to figure out what's next.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, it's not like you didn't have time to process this already, but I am sorry that it's formally official. But yes, look at Agtonomy. Look elsewhere, and of course, Shola, you know this network it's a good network to be in. So we'll help you out where we can.
Absolutely, much appreciated. I'm glad to be a part of the network.
Yeah. Florian, the last like 5 times we've had this, I've had an update about RobopsCon, and I have no actual ROG updates today. So I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add other than join us next time we host one of these.
Sorry, I was trying to mention something on the previous topic, and then I'll get into that. Yeah, let's support each other. Happy to connect on LinkedIn and kind of like amplify anything about jobs that you or your colleagues are looking for. I think I'm in the Bay Area, so I get to run into a lot of cruise people, and I think they're generally like top notch. So I'm sure, and my deep belief is that there will be more robots, not fewer robots, so people need people with your skills. Yeah, I think with what's going on at ROG, we are still hoping to get some of the video out for past events and for RobopsCon. For those who don't know, we held an in-person conference. We're trying to do this every 2 years. So the last one was back in October, and we just try to keep this group meeting regularly. So if you have ideas for topics that you want to discuss, feel free to jump on the meetup and suggest. If you have colleagues that you think would benefit from this level of discussion. Let's keep it going, keep the conversation going. And I was thinking, Joe, we might one idea for this year is we did it very ad hoc in previous years, which is for robotics conferences, or like, for example, I'm going to Manifest, which is a logistics technology company conference. Maybe there should be a birds of a feather, or like hey, let's get together and talk about robotics or laugh at the robots or whatever. Maybe we'll try to come up with some sort of calendar and an opportunity for people to connect.
It's a great idea. Yeah, we did that a lot in the past, and then I got no good reason. And to Florian's point, the videos are waiting on me. I'm the reason for the delay of the videos, but they'll be out soon-ish. After I do rogue taxes, then I can focus on the video.
Thanks, everyone.
Right, yeah, thank you all. Have a great day, and talk next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
good meeting you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.